November 18, 1943. Makira Island, Solomon Islands. Dawn arrived slowly over the jungle, dragging light across wet leaves and shattered coral, as if the island itself were reluctant to wake. The air smelled of salt, rotting wood, and burned fuel. In the distance, the low cough of American engines rolled in from the beach, steady and unhurried. Trucks moved inland along a narrow strip of crushed stone. Men jumped down from tailgates. Crates hit the ground. Shovels followed. Picks followed. Sweat followed everything. From high ground hidden behind palms and tangled vines, a Japanese commander lifted his binoculars and studied the scene below. He did not see tanks. He did not see artillery. He did not see defensive formations. He saw men in rolled sleeves unloading supplies. Engineers, builders, construction workers. The report matched what his scouts had already sent. Naval Construction Battalion, Seabees. The commander lowered the binoculars and allowed himself a single quiet breath of satisfaction. Let them build, he thought. When the airstrip is finished, it will belong to us. Down on the beach, the Seabees worked as if the war itself had paused to let them finish a job. Coral was crushed and leveled. Steel matting was dragged into place. Fuel drums were stacked with careful spacing. Supply tents rose in straight lines. The jungle was cut back yard by yard, every felled tree measured, every cleared path calculated. To a distant observer, it looked like nothing more than logistics, organization, routine. But nothing about Makira Island was routine. The island had already swallowed patrols. Storms rolled in without warning. The jungle bent sound in strange ways. You could hear a hammer strike from a mile away and miss a man breathing beside you. Every step off the cleared path sank into rot or vanished into shadow. Even time felt unreliable here, as if the sun itself hesitated over the canopy. Among the workers moving inland was a young Seabee engineer whose name would never appear in official after-action reports. To most men around him, he was just another builder. To a few, he was something else entirely. He checked measurements twice. He noted angles others ignored. He wrote in a small notebook at night when the generators cut off and the jungle reclaimed the dark. The letters he carried in his pack were already creased soft from being unfolded too many times. To the Japanese commander watching from the ridge, none of that mattered. For 3 days, the pattern never changed. Trucks arrived at dawn. Construction advanced by inches and feet. Airstrip foundations expanded where jungle had stood for centuries. Fuel dumps appeared in tidy rows. Communication wire was buried just beneath the soil. The Japanese observers sent back calm updates each night. No gun emplacements. No defensive trenches. No sign of preparation for resistance. Just construction. The commander began planning the seizure of the airstrip before it was even complete. He calculated timing. He mapped approach routes. He estimated the number of casualties it would take to overwhelm unarmed laborers. The math looked clean, almost effortless. On the 4th night, the jungle went silent. It did not happen suddenly. It thinned first. Insects faded. Birds vanished. Even the distant surf seemed to lower its voice. The silence crept in slowly, the way a storm does when the wind dies before the rain comes. In a forward Japanese observation unit less than 2 miles from the American build site, radios crackled with confusion. A routine patrol sent to confirm Seabee progress failed to report back. A second patrol went out to search for the first. It also failed to return. Search parties moved more cautiously after that. Their flashlights cut thin tunnels through the leaves. Their boots pressed into damp soil that showed no signs of struggle, no blood, no tracks leading out. Men were simply gone. The commander dismissed the early reports as jungle attrition. Disease, disorientation, local resistance fighters. Makira had eaten careless soldiers before. It would eat more. Still, something about the timing unsettled him. At dawn on the 5th day, the airstrip was empty. No trucks moved inland. No hammers rang. No engines idled at the tree line. The American build site stood untouched in the pale light, half-finished and strangely abandoned. Fuel drums sat where they had been stacked. Crates remained unbroken. Tools lay where they had been left the night before. The Seabees had vanished. The commander ordered immediate air reconnaissance. The reply returned 20 minutes later, confused and incomplete. The forward Japanese supply airfield, the one designated to support the seizure of the American strip, was burning. Communication towers had collapsed. Ammunition bunkers were smoking from within. No enemy units had been reported advancing on the position. There had been no battle. By mid-morning, similar reports began arriving from other forward positions along the supply corridor. Explosions without warning. Depots igniting from inside their own perimeter. Wires cut cleanly beneath the soil. No survivors able to explain what had happened. The commander stood at his map table and stared down at the thin blue lines that represented roads he had believed secure. One by one, they darkened in smoke. Then, just after noon, movement returned to the jungle. The Americans emerged from the tree line in coordinated waves, no longer carrying shovels or surveying poles. The same hands that had leveled coral now held rifles. The same trucks that had hauled steel matting now moved in disciplined formation. Paths that had once seemed random now revealed themselves as planned corridors. What the Japanese had believed to be construction had been measurement. What they had dismissed as labor had been reconnaissance. Every road had been mapped without drawing fire. Every bunker had been marked while passing as a supply detail. Every communications trench had been traced under the excuse of laying cable. By the time the commander realized his error, the shape of the battlefield had already changed. Japanese units attempted to reposition, but orders failed to arrive. Couriers disappeared between checkpoints that no longer existed. Entire companies moved toward coordinates that no longer matched reality on the ground. By nightfall, forward battalions had stopped reporting entirely. Later, the official count would claim that 3,500 men vanished from the operational board within a single cycle of sun and darkness. Not defeated in a climactic clash. Not overrun in a conventional engagement. Simply removed faster than reinforcements could move. The builders had never been just builders, and the airstrip had never been the true objective. Weeks later, captured Japanese documents would reveal the full depth of the miscalculation. The airfield the commander intended to seize was never meant to be defended at all. It was a decoy, a visible prize placed in the open to draw attention and commit enemy resources. The true target lay inland, beyond broken ridges and swamp channels that heavy units could not traverse with speed. A command hub buried beneath layered jungle and believed to be unreachable without full-scale assault. Yet somehow, the Seabees had reached it first. How they moved through terrain deemed impassable would never be fully explained. Prisoners questioned after the fighting would give the same answer in different words. They said the Americans built their way forward, that they turned jungle into road and road into weapon. But what exactly that meant remained unclear. Rumors began circulating even among Allied units stationed far from Akira. Some whispered that demolition gear had been hidden in supply crates marked as cement. Others claimed Seabee units had trained secretly as shock infantry long before their landings. A few said intelligence officers had walked openly among the builders, counting steps and sight lines in full daylight. Official records confirmed none of it. Only the outcome remained. A Japanese force that believed it was watching laborers had underestimated the most adaptable unit operating in the Pacific. And somewhere deep in the jungle, beyond the airstrip that fooled everyone, lay the site of the real operation. A place erased so completely that even post-war surveys would fail to locate it with certainty. And if the airstrip was a lie, then the question that remained was more unsettling than any battlefield loss. What exactly had the Seabees truly come to build? If you are watching WW2 Frontline Legends from anywhere in the world, subscribe and tell us where you are watching from. History like this connects us across oceans and generations. Because what happened on Makira did not end with that silence in the jungle. It only marked the moment when the war changed shape. The jungle did not give back what it took. In the days following the collapse of the forward Japanese positions, the interior of Makira became a place without borders. Maps lost meaning. Roads that once existed were gone. New paths appeared where no trail had ever been cut. The land itself seemed to rearrange under pressure, swallowing evidence as fast as it revealed it. Japanese reinforcements were ordered inland from the remaining coastal strongholds. They moved at night to avoid American aircraft, advancing through ravines and along dried riverbeds. Every step forward felt like walking into a room that had already been emptied of air. Units expected resistance. They found absence. Camps abandoned while still warm. Cooking fires reduced to faint embers. Boots lying alone beside trails that ended in nothing. It was as if an army had passed through without leaving footprints. The American engineer, who had once measured coral, by day now moved under canopy with a different tool in his hands. The notebook that once carried dimensions now carried sequences. Signal timings, detonation intervals, extraction windows. The men around him no longer spoke in full sentences. They communicated with brief glances and hand signals, the kind that only form when people train in silence for a very long time. They were no longer building something visible. They were shaping the battlefield itself. Japanese command struggled to identify where the next strike would fall. Every assumed target proved wrong. Supply columns vanished without gunfire. Forward observation bunkers were found intact yet empty, as if their crews had stepped out of time. Radio transmissions fractured into static and half messages that ended mid-syllable. One message, intercepted too late to matter, ended with the words, "They are not laborers." By the time that realization spread through the chain of command, it could no longer change the outcome. The inland command hub had been designed for endurance. Buried into layered stone and reinforced with timber taken from the jungle itself, it was meant to outlast bombardment. The Japanese considered it unreachable without months of preparation and overwhelming firepower. That assumption was built into every defensive plan that followed. But the approach to the hub was not fought through. It was constructed. Narrow access paths appeared where no trail had existed. Swamp crossings hardened overnight. Slopes once judged impassable were stabilized with material that did not belong to the island. By the time the defenders realized those changes were hostile acts, the path had already been finished. The assault on the hub, when it came, unfolded without the sounds of battle one would expect. There was no artillery barrage, no long exchange of fire, just a sudden failure of power. Darkness rushing through corridors that had never known it. Doors that opened at the wrong time. Charges placed not to shatter walls, but to seal exits. When it was over, the command center was silent. No formal record would ever describe the moment of its capture. The logs ended mid-entry. Maps were found pinned to walls, with plans still unfolding toward victories that would never come. The Seabees did not raise flags there. They did not hold the ground. They dismantled it and disappeared. That was when the second truth of Makira began to surface. The airstrip that had drawn all attention was not merely a decoy. It was also a message. A deliberate lie placed in open sight to teach the enemy where to look. The real work happened where no one believed anything could be built at all. Japanese leadership struggled to explain how such a transformation had occurred without detection. Their analysts reviewed aerial photographs taken before the operation. Nothing unusual appeared. No buildup. No armored presence. No evidence of offensive preparation. And yet, an entire inland command network was gone. Prisoners taken in later skirmishes offered little clarity. Some claimed the Americans carried demolition charges disguised as concrete anchors. Others said their tools unfolded into weapons with practiced ease. A few insisted that intelligence officers walked openly among the construction crews, counting ranges and mapping sightlines under the protection of apparent harmlessness. One prisoner described a supply crate labeled survey stakes that exploded with the force of heavy artillery. None of their accounts fully aligned. The American engineer would never confirm any of it. When questioned by officers after the operation, his debrief was short and unremarkable. Timelines, coordinates, material lists. He described what had been built, not what had been destroyed. The distinction mattered to him in a way few others understood. What followed the fall of the command hub was not a sweeping American advance, but something stranger. The Japanese line did not break all at once. It thinned. Units began withdrawing without clear orders. Others moved forward into traps that should not have existed. The battlefield lost its shape. For the men still fighting, it felt as if the ground itself had turned hostile. Every road might vanish. Every bridge might already be wired. Every clearing might have been measured weeks earlier by men who never appeared armed. The war on Makira shifted from open confrontation to quiet erasure. At night, soldiers whispered about builders who moved without sound, about paths that formed behind their own retreat, about equipment that appeared where no aircraft had dropped it. Stories grew as fear always grows in the dark. But unlike most battlefield legends, these did not fade with daylight. They accumulated evidence. In the weeks that followed, Japanese casualty reports no longer listed battles. They listed disappearances. Men reassigned to positions that no longer existed. Units ordered to defend coordinates that could not be found on any surviving map. Official tallies would later fix the number at 3,500. The figure would harden into history. But on the island itself, no one experienced it as a number. They experienced it as the sudden absence of voices that had filled camps only days before. The American engineer did not remain on Makira long after the inland hub was neutralized. His unit shifted forward under new designation orders. Supplies followed routes that had not existed 2 weeks earlier. Aircraft began landing on coral foundations that had once seemed like the whole point of the operation. To outside observers, it now appeared that the airstrip had been the objective all along. That illusion remained useful. It kept attention focused outward, toward visible logistics and transport. It kept eyes off the interior, where nothing could now be found to explain what had happened. After the island was secured, Allied survey teams were sent to document battlefield damage. They found the remains of bunkers, burned storage pits, fragmented communications wire. But when they searched for the inland command hub that had once coordinated the entire Japanese defensive sector, they failed to locate it with certainty. The jungle had already closed the gap. It reclaimed the ridges. It folded over the cut paths. It erased the subtle differences between land that had been shaped by intention and land that had been shaped by centuries. Even the cleared corridors the Seabees had used to reach the hub vanished beneath vines and rain within months. When post-war historians attempted to reconstruct the sequence of events, they relied on partial documents, incomplete interviews, aerial photographs that showed before and after but not during. The timeline could be inferred. The results could be confirmed. But the method remained stubbornly unclear. How did an engineering unit move through terrain that planners deemed impassable? How did construction conceal conquest so completely? Why did the men involved refuse to describe their work in anything but the language of building? The American engineer returned home after the war to a world that did not know what to call him. He became, on paper, a veteran like any other. He did not carry a list of confirmed engagements. He did not appear in famous photographs. His medals, if any were awarded, did not explain the absence that trailed his name through military archives. The work he had done did not leave ruins that could be toured. It left nothing that could be easily pointed to at all. And that, perhaps, was the final design. The builders had constructed an absence so complete that even memory struggled to hold it. By the time peace came to the Pacific, Makira was again just an island of jungle and coral in the maps of the world. The airstrip remained. The roads remained. The visible signs of occupation remained. The true operation did not, which raised a question that would follow every fragment of testimony for decades without settling into a single answer. If what the Seabees destroyed was never meant to be seen, then what exactly had they built that allowed them to do it? And why did no official record ever attempt to explain it? The war moved on without waiting for explanation. Makira slipped out of headlines and briefings as new islands took its place in the steady march across the Pacific. New landings, new airstrips, new casualties. The visible machinery of war kept grinding forward. Only the invisible work remained behind, folded into sealed reports and half-finished maps. For the Japanese command, the loss of the inland hub left a wound that never fully closed. Replacement units were sent into positions that no longer matched the terrain. Defensive plans unraveled without clear cause. Coordinated responses failed again and again, not because orders were wrong, but because the ground no longer obeyed the assumptions those orders were built upon. They had planned for invasion. They had not planned for re-engineering. The Americans never repeated the same method in quite the same way again. That was part of what made Makira so difficult to reconstruct. Later operations borrowed fragments of what had been done there, but never the full shape. The war adapted, as wars always do. What had been radical became absorbed into doctrine without being named. The Seabees returned to building in open daylight on other islands. Airstrips rose. Ports expanded. Roads cut through jungle and rock. To most observers, it looked like the same work they had always done. But some who had seen Makira knew better. They watched differently after that. They paid attention to where a road appeared overnight, to why supply routes curved a certain way, to how quickly a path became permanent. They learned to ask quiet questions when tools moved with unusual urgency, when survey teams returned with measurements that reached farther than any blueprint required. The American engineer never spoke publicly about Makira after the war. His personal papers, found decades later by family members, contained almost nothing that could be tied directly to the operation. The notebook that once held sequences and intervals had been burned. The letters from home remained. The pages that might have explained how the jungle had been turned into a weapon were gone. What little survived were fragments. A receipt for equipment never officially issued to his unit. A folded map with no date and no scale. A single line written in the margin of a photograph that showed a stretch of coral runway, built enough to end it. What it referred to was never clarified. Post-war military historians attempted to fill the gaps with logic. They proposed theories that the Seabees had functioned as advanced pathfinders for special operations forces, that they had deployed prepositioned demolition supplies under the cover of civilian engineering work, that the inland hub had been sabotaged gradually over weeks rather than taken in a single strike. Each theory explained part of the outcome. None explained the whole. The Japanese records that might have closed the loop were either destroyed during the retreat or lost in the chaos that followed. Interviews with surviving officers contradicted one another. Some insisted the hub had never existed at all, and that its loss was a misunderstanding created by disrupted communications. Others claimed it had been eliminated by air attack that simply went unrecorded. Neither account aligned with the physical evidence, because there was none. No crater field, no ruins, no identifiable battlefield, just jungle where something crucial had once been. By the early 1950s, Makira ceased to be mentioned in formal operational studies. It drifted into footnotes, then into appendices, then out of view entirely, eclipsed by larger battles and more visible turning points. What did remain was quieter and harder to measure. A shift in how war was imagined. Engineers were no longer seen only as support. Construction was no longer just preparation. The line between building and fighting blurred in ways that no manual fully addressed. Roads became weapons. Logistics became tactics. Measurement became strategy. Makira had altered the shape of conflict without leaving a monument to prove it. For the men who had been present, memory carried the weight that history did not. Some remembered the night the jungle went silent. Others remembered walking paths that vanished behind them as they advanced. A few remembered being ordered to dismantle structures they had only just completed, piece by piece, as if erasing their own footsteps. They carried those memories quietly. The American engineer lived the rest of his life as a civilian whose hands had once reshaped a battlefield. He raised a family. He worked ordinary jobs. He attended reunions where stories were told around tables heavy with food and laughter. When Makira was mentioned at all, it was usually followed by a pause that drifted off into something safer. He would listen. He would not add anything. When asked directly what had happened in the interior of the island, he answered the same way the prisoners once had. They built their way in. And then he would change the subject. Decades passed. The jungle reclaimed more ground. Satellite imagery replaced aerial reconnaissance. Historians gained new tools to see what had once been hidden. They located forgotten strips, abandoned trenches, ghost roads swallowed by canopy. But the inland hub did not appear. It remained an absence inside an absence, which led some to question whether it had ever existed at all in the form survivors described. Skeptics argued that the entire story had grown in the telling, that fear and confusion had filled the blanks left by shattered command structures, that the hub was not a place, but a concept that dissolved under pressure. Others disagreed. They pointed to the sequence of losses, to the collapse of coordinated defense far beyond what random disruption could explain, to the sudden intelligence failures that followed the same geographic pattern, to the Japanese documents that referenced a command node without ever placing it clearly on a surviving map. Something had been there. Something had been removed. And the method by which it vanished had been designed not to leave a scar. Perhaps that was the true accomplishment. Not the number of casualties, not the capture of territory, but the creation of a moment in war that left no obvious mark for the enemy to study afterward. A victory without a visible battlefield. In the end, Makira returned to what it had been before the war arrived. Rain fell. Vines climbed. Paths faded. The coral runway weathered into the landscape until it looked like another pale stretch of stone beneath the sun. Only those who knew where to look could still see the lines hidden in its shape. If the airstrip had been a lie placed in open daylight, if the real work had been done beneath leaves and shadow, then the question that still waits for an answer is not about how many were lost. It is about what kind of war can be fought without ever fully revealing itself. Because if the Seabees built something on Makira that no one was meant to find, then what they constructed may still exist in the way modern conflict unfolds, even now. And that possibility, more than any explosion or casualty report, is a part of the story that has never truly been closed. If stories like this remind you that courage, deception, and quiet intelligence shape the world we live in, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and tell us where you are watching from. Every corner of the world carries echoes of these hidden battles.